Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's watch party for Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. I am, as always, I'm Andrew, the host, and I'm joined today by our amazing director of In Search of Darkness 1, In Search of Darkness 2, the upcoming In Search of Tomorrow, and who knows what else in the future. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be with everybody here. I know I don't make these as often as I would like to, so when I do get a chance, it's a real treat for me.
That's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Okay, and hello to our community. Just to advise everybody, our sync point for the movie today will be when the Paramount, A Gulf and Western Company logo fills the screen completely. But before we start, while everyone gets just themselves sorted, David, can you tell us about why you really wanted to do this, your love for this movie?
My love for this movie goes deep, and I'll try and keep it short. We could talk about it during the film itself.
Oh, certainly.
I was a Star Trek nut. I was a Trekkie, not a Trekker. I was a Trekkie when I was a kid. I watched every single original series episode over and over and over in syndication. I ran around with Mego action figures and pretended I was Kirk. I was one of those kids. And so when the movies came along, the first one I enjoyed, but I was a bit befuddled like many others, but I was happy to get something. Star Trek II comes along, everything is different, and I'm just cautiously optimistic. And as everybody knows, it blew all of us out of the water. So, and I've seen it, I can't even tell you how many times ever since.
I think I'm probably the same. It's just an incredible film. But let's get into this incredible film. So if everyone gets ready to press play on the count of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, press play, and here we are.
Paramount presents.
That's right. And now the thing is, David, that a lot of people who maybe are casual Star Trek viewers, this was almost a soft reboot for the series, wasn't it?
It sure was. Everyone who made Star Trek as a theatrical, no one expected it to be theatrical,
No.
Because they basically we're prepping this to be a series again called Phase 2. It was going to be a TV series, and it was cast, sets were being built, scripts were made, and then Star Wars came along, and everyone said, "Wait, no." Paramount said, "What do we have for the big screen that's like Star Wars?" Oh yeah, there's that old '60s show that we were redoing, Star Trek. So they literally pulled the plug and then started production on Star Trek, the motion picture. And as many people know, Star Trek, the motion picture, while it was spectacular in terms of special effects, it was a little dry. Yeah. It was a little dry and didn't quite capture the spirit of the series as everyone had hoped for. Robert Wise directed that, and that was more of a combination of 2001: A Space Odyssey meets Star Trek. It was very intellectual, and Gene Roddenberry was very he drove that home as how he wanted his Star Trek movie. Star Trek II comes along. They want to do it again because they thought they could do it and make money on it, but there was a lot riding on it, and Gene Roddenberry was essentially taken off the project. And Harv Bennett, the producer, who had done like The Bionic Woman and $6 Million Man and the Mod Squad and stuff like that, he came on to basically approach this in a different way. And we could talk all about that, but this was essentially, we have one more chance, and if we get this right, we can keep going. If we don't get this right, back to the scrap heap for quite some time.
I mean, I'll be fair, they knocked it out of the park with it completely, because without Wrath of Khan, we wouldn't have had Star Trek: The Next Generation, we wouldn't have had Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and all the legacy we've had since. But the threads, the roots of all those shows can still be found in this, with the way sort of Starfleet and the Federation was rearranged into a coherent kind of entity with more militaristic, which Gene Roddenberry hated, of course.
That's the thing. Nicholas Meyer, who he was into Sherlock Holmes. He did Time After Time, which is also one of my all-time favorite movies. He did
wonderful film.
When he knew nothing about Star Trek. This is pretty well known. Here, we'll dive into this scene in a moment.
Exactly.
But he knew nothing about Star Trek and had zero interest, but he saw it as an opportunity to turn it into a nautically themed sort of battleship film inspired by Horatio Hornblower, which he was a big fan of. So here we are on the Kobayashi Maru.
That's right.
And at first, when we all saw this, there's a whole element here where it leaked out that Spock was going to die in this film. And everyone was angry that Spock was going to be dying, and everybody knew it, and they couldn't believe that. And so part of this this scene, which is the Kobayashi Maru training exercise, was kind of a way to sort of, throw a red herring by killing not only Spock, but a number of characters off the bat, just to throw everyone off the scent and stop them thinking about that, thinking, oh, well, this is what they meant. Oh, it was a fake out, and it's no big deal. And people could focus on the movie itself.
Exactly. It's just a wonderful way to open the movie, because you're not even aware this is a spoiler. This is a training simulation, but all will be revealed as we go. We've got some questions already from the Discord community for you.
I want to jump in real quick,
Yeah,
just before I forget. This scene initially was not at the very beginning. It was somewhere in the middle of the script, and they decided to put it right in the front to sort of set the stage, and also to throw off everyone's missed, expectations of, Spock dying. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So a question from Sparky John, which is, did Star Trek II originally start as a TV project as a TV movie project after the disappointment of the motion picture?
Nope. It was never a TV movie project. So the series Phase 2 was going to be, they bandied about all sorts of ideas, whether it was going to be a series or a bunch of TV movies, but that was for all for Phase 2. The problem was when they started with Star Trek II. Here we have the only time we see the Klingons.
This is actually a reuse of footage from the motion picture, because this movie was a bit of penny pinching went on in this movie, didn't it? They reused a lot of shots.
Big penny pinching. They said if this movie gets made at all, you get, we gave you $100 last time, you get 10 cents this time. And mind you, this is the Enterprise bridge that's going to be reused 3 times in this movie. So you've got the training bridge, then you've got the actual Enterprise bridge, and then you've got the Reliant bridge, and it's all the same set, reorganized each and every time. The script for Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan was a big mess. There had been a number of scripts, and this is how Nicholas Meyer came on. As Harv Bennett said, there are a number of scripts, but nothing works, and we need to make a movie, and we're now running out of time if we want to get all the Industrial Light and Magic effects laid out and done to meet our release date, which we've promised, but we have no film, we have no script. And so it's all kind of working backwards. And so Harv Bennett recruited Nicholas Meyer, who watched a bunch of episodes, and they liked Space Seed. But what he did was all these other scripts, he said, why don't you tell me what you like in all these scripts, any moment, and we'll put it in a big pile, and I will piece this all together and write a coherent script based on, top moments that you want to include. Kirk and his son, the Kobayashi Maru, a variety of different things, Spock dies, whatever it may be, and ended up making just a miraculous and amazing script in a very short period of time.
Oh, definitely. What I would say is, for those who maybe haven't looked into it or seen the images, I think that possibly Star Trek Phase 2 not getting made was dodging a bullet somewhat. If you look at the aesthetics for the show, it would have looked very dated when it was released, because they tried to have a very similar aesthetic to the original series. There are sort of test photos, etc., where they were getting ready using basically the original uniforms, even in the late 70s, and it didn't work.
One of the elements that Nicholas Meyer really wanted to incorporate in this is he hated all the techno babble. He's like, why don't they talk like normal people? He didn't understand Star Trek lingo, but he wanted some anachronistic elements. He's like, does anyone read a book? But let's sort of incorporate this as sort of an antique about. I laugh at this because they never say how old Kirk is turning on his birthday, but it's assumed that he's turning 50 and just the world is ending for him.
Exactly. But what I really, again, I mean, we're seeing a guy, look there, this is a big difference in this Star Trek world. We're seeing someone actually appears to be hoovering or cleaning a floor behind them in this scene. the world is a lot richer than we're used to, especially with the motion picture. It was a very sterile kind of environment. Everything was, it was borderline that I'm going to sit down and eat my space dinner with my space drink. It was.
And your Happy Meal, your Klingon Happy Meal. But Nicholas Meyer thought that the whole set looked like the Holiday Inn, and everyone was wearing their pajamas. And here, let me clarify. I'm not here to slam Star Trek: The Motion Picture. It's an easy target. I actually really like the Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I've grown to love it and really appreciate it over some of the other Star Trek films. It definitely has its merits, but it also has its weaknesses at every turn. But I love this scene too, because they're really driving home the fact that he's decided. Kirk has decided his career is over. Really, he doesn't feel, he's kind of lost at sea. He's among his own antiques and his relics. He has to have an antique because he can't get the proper prescription, for his he's
allergic to the eye medication.
Exactly. Thank you. And this is really setting up the camaraderie and the friendship and the family element that was already, by now, this is something that was sorely missing in Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Because we all know that Kirk, Spock, and McCoy and the Enterprise crew are old friends who have been through a lot, and but the relationship that McCoy has always had with Kirk is that he's the only guy who could tell Kirk the truth and get away with it, and that's why we've always loved McCoy.
I'm going to put an interesting spin on the Enterprise crew from this movie. I'm going forwards into some of the others with the original crew. Their friendship holds them back potentially in their careers because they are very high-ranking officers. If, for example, we go to Star Trek VI, which is the last of the original crew movies, if you look at it, Kirk is a captain, Spock is a captain, McCoy is actually a captain, Scotty is a captain, Uhura is a commander, and Chekov is a commander. Yet they're all on. But Chekov is acting as a helmsman.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like is their friendship because they want to be together. They're requesting the assignments to stay together.
You could absolutely see that if you want to choose to see that. I always, and this is me personally as a Star Trek fan, I love Star Trek and the Star Trek world, and I respect canon, but I always sort of toe the line between the considerations of just keeping everyone together because it's what people want and the reality of what would be happening in the Star Trek world. And so I've never questioned that, even though at one point it came like, oh, they're still hanging out together at this age. But, here's an example where Walter Koenig, Pavel Chekov, I always remember also, like, we haven't seen Chekov yet at this point. And the fact that he's off on a separate mission was the first sort of dose of reality within the construct of this story, where I'm like, oh yeah, there would be guys from the Enterprise crew who wouldn't still be hanging out together. They're off on different far-flung missions and advancements in their career.
Exactly. I mean, it's also it's quite interesting. Captain Tyrrell here, who's absolutely a wonderful. The actor is wonderful. However, you can see he's not Captain Kirk or Admiral Kirk in this case. And very much when we come to Star Trek 3, you can see that not all captains are equal in their skill in dealing with situations. I would say Captain Tyrrell is maybe one of the better mediocre captains, but I'd say he's not a superstar captain. And you imagine he might have managed the mission and everything that happens slightly differently.
Well, it's interesting here because a lot of this element of the story is about the politics of Starfleet. Because they are under pressure to find a spot to test the Genesis project. and they're just like going on countless worlds, and they're like, can't we, even if there's a microscopic little element of life, do we have to, abort the entire mission? And they're like, yeah, you have to do, because that's life. So there's some respect there.
Yeah. Oh, great. Merritt Buttrick, who sadly is no longer with us, he appeared in Star Trek 3 times, which is probably one of the most famous things. He actually was in Fright Night 2, which we covered a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
But he appeared in, of course, this Star Trek 2, Star Trek 3, and he appeared in an early episode of Star Trek The Next Generation.
Now, wasn't he, I have to double check this one now, wasn't he in Square Pigs as well?
He could well have been, but he was in an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation called Symbiosis, where he played a member of a race who were effectively addicted to a narcotic by another race to their own means.
This is an entirely different show. Back in '82, there was a sitcom that was kind of a Ferris Bueller-y early. It was a sitcom called Square Pegs, and I remember noticing that he was there. Sarah Jessica Parker, Sarah Jessica Parker.
The chat have confirmed he was. He certainly was.
There you go.
Now, I've been told today that apparently this is in the timeline about 15 years on from the original episode Space Seed. What I can only presume is that the augment children grow at a faster rate. Because Khan has aged, but none of his crew, because there were 72 of them.
Right.
Well, 72 plus Khan's wife.
Yes.
Who was Lieutenant MacGyver, but spelt differently, so not associated with MacGyver.
Yes. She changed her name from MacGruber to MacGyver. Yeah. This is part of your job, Andrew, and I respect it, that you're looking at the logic or lack thereof, and we're about to walk into a scene where logic is completely thrown out of the window. That most Star Trek fans, even the most casual, if you've seen Space Seed, will kind of scratch their head, and we could talk about that. But
don't get me wrong, it's great, and I have no problem with it. I just, especially maybe having seen, to the casual fan, it wouldn't matter so much. Then that's also one of the joys in this movie, because it's very much, it's part of our summer of popcorn, as you know. It's an accessible Star Trek movie.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to really have seen or particularly remember Space Seed to see it.
I think what would be different in these days is if you drew on an original series character and episode, there'd be some sort of flashback, to tie it all together. I think it was great that they didn't do that, and they all say it. It's all verbalized, and so you either saw it and care, or you could say, oh, they knew each other from the past. But of course, this is where the confusion lies, where he finds the Botany Bay,
logo,
and of course, Chekov was not in that episode, and of course,
he wasn't in that season.
Argued, well, he just was, he wasn't on duty in the bridge when that all went down. But the truth of the matter is that he seemed to be the best available character to write this scene, and it was convenient, and no one cared at the time that it wasn't connected directly to the episode.
That isn't something I have so much of a problem with as you can imagine. Khan's influence being something that would be in ship logs, and Chekov being a senior member of the crew on the Enterprise would maybe know about what has happened historically.
Mm-hmm.
I think also, and I'm going to put possibly a controversial spin on this, that Kirk is at fault. Khan is justified.
Khan is justified in
his rage, to an extent, because they dumped them on a planet 15 years ago, but there was never any checking up on them. Well,
but is it Kirk's fault or is it Starfleet's fault? Is it Kirk's responsibility to go back for every mutineer that has to be tossed and marooned on a planet to check up on them? I would say that's Starfleet. You
It
know?
would certainly be down to Starfleet's fault. Yet I would have thought Kirk would have said, used his position to say, well, how are they getting on? Just in 15 years, your mind might turn to them and just say, and look for the record.
Yeah, yeah, 5-year mission, lots of aliens, lots of bad guys, lots of things to keep track of. Must he go back and keep track of every single thing that he's done to make sure that everyone is in good hands. Yeah. Anyway, we can talk about that, but
Exactly.
It's
just an interesting thing for Khan's motivation, really. Here,
I was going to share something that I think people would appreciate. It's a little quick show and tell element. When I was a kid, I had no idea that they were making Star Trek II until they started advertising it. And I remember there was a magazine insert that looked like this. And I didn't even know what it was. And it says, at the end of the universe lies the beginning of vengeance. And I'm like, what's that? I didn't even know it was Star Trek. And this is an insert to the magazine. Then you open it up and and this just blew my mind. Here's the back. Basically, this is the original thing that I had when I was a kid. And it told me right there and then that this was a colorful Star Trek, an action-packed Star Trek, so much better than what we got last time around. And I was pretty content with what we got last time around. But this scene on Ceti Alpha 5 is, you see Khan, you don't even know it's Khan. No. You see all the Khanians, his crew.
The augments, they're called, aren't they?
And I just remember from the moment I opened that up, I could not wait. I was counting the days, and you get a really good look at the new uniforms. Yeah. And I remember even then, I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is something I've never seen before. Or they're not, Kirk's not wearing yellow, Spock's not wearing blue. They're all wearing this sort of the maroon monster.
Yeah. No, I really like new uniforms. I like all of this. But Khan's quoting everything.
And of course, for me also, which another element approaching this film, which was kind of interesting, was I was a kid who also watched Fantasy Island all the time.
Yeah.
And I had watched every single Space Seed. I saw Space Seed. I saw every single original series episode. But by the time Wrath of Khan came along, I had forgotten for a moment that Ricardo Montalban was Khan in Space Seed. So I remember when I heard that they cast him as Khan, as the bad guy in Wrath of Khan, all I could think of was like, that's an interesting choice. They use Mr. Rourke from Fantasy Island to be the bad guy? Okay. Well, I have an open mind. I'll give it a try. But he's so wonderful in this, and he chews up the scenery so magnificently. And Nicholas Meyer was intimidated by him because he's such a fantastic actor. And it was during this scene that they're filming, that we're showing now, that there were some moments where Khan really was way more over the top than he is in this scene. And Nicholas Meyer took him to his trailer and sat him down and said, all right, really intimidated, but saying, this is what I'm thinking, a little less is more, wait for the big moments, because then it'll be more powerful and more impactful. Yeah. And rather than Montalban getting angry at him or indignant, he said, oh, so you're going to direct me? Wonderful. And then they had a wonderful relationship from that moment on.
He's a wonderful actor in this. And one thing I think is a choice that they made from Space Seed, something they dropped, because there's an elephant in the room in Space Seed that they've dropped from this movie, and I think it's good, and it's made the movie age much better, is they've dropped elements of Khan's makeup from Space Seed. Mm-hmm. Which
element
I think
of his makeup,
like
the refresh my memory.
In Space Seed, he was rather, his skin color had been altered somewhat.
Aha. Well, you know, not much sun on Ceti Alpha 5.
Exactly, but I'll go with they dropped it for whatever reason. I think it's a good idea. It's not given the movie a difficult. It's not given the movie an elephant in the room, which is a good thing.
Indeed. In the recontextualization of present day is what you're very trying to actually say.
Yeah.
This scene, the eels, the Ceti Alpha eel, is one of the darkest things that you'll ever see in a Star Trek movie. You know, it definitely gets very dark, pretty horrific. Oh, yeah. Conceptually for a PG movie and a Star Trek movie. And
I want to interrupt you just for a second, Ed. I want to ask our Discord community, who else had nightmares about these eels, these worms, these earwigs, whatever you want to call them? I mean, they're eels, but they're Who didn't have nightmares about this?
I have to say I think many people know there was a recent sort of back and forth on the internet about you can't have horror in space. You know, and everyone jumped on that real quickly. And, you know, of course, used Alien as the prime example. One of the examples I used as, you know, there's some horror in space is Star Trek, you know, and this moment is there's plenty of horror and late night thoughts, you know, because this is basically goes to everyone's, there's their deepest nightmare of, you know, a spider, you know, laying eggs in your ear or your nose or something like that and having no control over it. This all stuff was shot in post at Industrial Light and Magic, and Walter Koenig told me that this was one of the most fun scenes for him to shoot. He really enjoyed it.
Oh, it's got people in the chat. Linda Hill says, I had trouble sleeping for weeks after seeing this. I think everyone's petrified by this scene. But again, Ricardo Montalban is just, he carries the movie himself. I mean, what I find amazing is it's a duel movie, as in a head-to-head battle, but it's literally a head-to-head battle between Kirk and the whole team against Khan. And he holds his scenes just so brilliantly. And what you have to remember is by the end of the movie, and this is something for people to watch out, Kirk and Khan actually never meet in the movie in person. Never.
Yeah, they're never in the same space.
Nope.
They're in space together, the same one, but never in the same space.
Exactly. The only member of the crew who meets both sort of sides is Chekov.
This is basically this scene right here is essentially a retread of the Bravura opening and introduction to the brand new Enterprise that Douglas Trumbull did in Star Trek: The Motion Picture. And I think it's worth every penny to do it again, because this really sets the scope when you have the Enterprise in dry dock at how big these movies can be and how the effects are spectacular. And they went to ILM for the effects this time around. And it was a wise decision. It was money well spent.
Oh, certainly. But I think possibly the thing that they did right here was something I think we've discussed privately in the past, is they maybe should have, the tighter editing of that scene works better here. In the motion picture, it's
a gorgeous porn going around for 5 minutes, which is also enjoyable.
Exactly. It's a lot of fun, the scene, but at 5 minutes of a shot, it is too long.
Well, says you. There's a great like 20-minute cut where they just loop it around and around and around, and it cracks me up. There's Ike Eisenman, who was in Escape from Witch Mountain and Return to Witch Mountain in Disney movies, and a lot of after-school specials like Duffy Moon. I had a real wonderful chat with him for In Search of Tomorrow, and I can't wait for you to hear his insights on geeking out with the Enterprise crew and the unexpected things that he experienced when he shot this film. Here's the only time we get a little Vulcan chit chat with some subtitles, right?
That's right. No. There is a scene as well in a lift, I believe.
But are they speaking in Vulcan?
I seem to think they're not. I'm not sure.
We'll have to see. Nobody's perfect, Savick. There's a little slight on the humans. This is also, there's some great little character touches here. You know, there's the camaraderie right here with Scotty. I love this moment where he does a little wipe on the console looking for dust.
Yeah.
And that look from Scotty is just like, you make a joke, but you will find no dust on that, my friend.
Well, the interesting thing is as well, this set here ultimately became the engine room set for Star Trek Next Generation.
Oh, yeah.
The building blocks of it are there. The warp core was redressed to become the Enterprise D's warp core. And there's this little lift that he goes up on now became the little lift platform in the Enterprise D.
This is just, I've seen this movie 100 times, and every time I see this scene, you know, the swell of the James Horner music, even that little moment when he's going up the little lift and he goes, he doesn't say it, he just goes, and all these great little character moments that show that all these people know each other well. And
he knows Scotty well enough that he doesn't have to do an inspection with Scotty. Kirk has so much trust in his crew that he knows he doesn't have to check on anything they're doing for the most part, because but even if it's against regulations, he knows, he's like, yeah, it's fine, I trust him enough.
Yeah. One thing that always confused me at first when I saw this is they call Savick Mr. Savick, and I always, every time, you know, it took me about 3 rounds of Mr. Savick for me to get used to that, because I wasn't quite used to that jargon.
So I've got another question for you from our Discord community, David. This is again from Sparky John, which is, as great as Jerry Goldsmith's score is for the motion picture, do you think James Horner's score is the best out of all the Star Trek movies?
That's a tough question, Sparky John. That's a tough call, because the Jerry Goldsmith, the whole score as together is really spectacular, and haunting and beautiful and elegant. The Klingon themes, the space, Ilea's theme, it's all so wonderful. And it really set the tone for the later films. And then so this comes along, James Horner, and I quickly realized, other than, you know, the Alexander Courage theme that's inserted selectively, very selectively in this film, it is a very different feel. And it's very hard looking at all this stuff. This is like a way long, complicated answer, but you know, our memories of all this stuff now are very informed by the fact that they used, you know, Star Trek Next Generation theme, you know, as the Jerry Goldsmith's theme. So it's hard to separate those out now when you look back at these movies. I think the music, my only regret out of all the scores is that they couldn't afford James Horner for Star Trek IV. They used Leonard Rosenman, who had done things like, you know, Lord of the Rings animated series and stuff like that, and a variety of things. But I just felt like that was the biggest disconnect out of all of them.
Yeah.
So very long story short, this is a soundtrack I had on vinyl. I still do. I played over and over and over and over and over. Star Trek III, amazing score as well, just sort of adding to what he had built on this. And it really is just a wonderful symphony that takes you really on this adventure, and you feel it. That's my short answer.
I'd agree with you. There. It's like asking people to pick between your favorite children. What's better, Horner or Goldsmith?
The Sophie's Choice of Star Trek.
It really is. Anyway, just to quickly mention, this space station here is actually the same model space station used again in the motion picture, saving some money here. They turned it upside down.
Right? There you go.
Upside down.
And, you know, K7 from Trouble with Tribbles was unavailable, so they used this one. Another little quick anecdote is when they built the Reliant and they wanted it to be a Starfleet, you know, ship, but different from, you know, clearly different from the Enterprise, but similar nonetheless to be in the same fleet. When they put it on Harv Bennett's desk to say, you know, this is what we've got, he loved it. He loved it on first sight. And they found out later that it was put on his desk upside down.
But again, that model is a model with a real legacy, because it was one that continued on that model. Well, that model was used in episodes of Star Trek Next Generation. It was
it's a favorite. It's a favorite. Yeah. And here's another scene where you have one of the key Enterprise crew. This is the first time we see it, but we see it again in Star Trek V, when everyone is sort of absorbed by Cybok and turned into their sort of automatons for the purpose of the bad guy. You kind of have that as sort of recurring theme in the films. You know, I guess they ran out of ideas for Star Trek V, but
wow, Star Trek V, yes. I've still got to work out if we do schedule a watch party for that at some point.
Why not? Why not?
At some point we will.
It does have its virtues. It's kind of like, you know, because there's only 6 to choose from, it's easy to compare everything to Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. But I think each have their virtues. Absolutely.
I think what I really like about Star Trek, the Star Trek trilogy, if you refer to it as that, 2, 3, and 4, they are their own little self-contained kind of trilogy and story. And it gets really quite unpleasant with Star Trek. Star Trek II is the opening, and it ends on a bit of a downer with hope. Star Trek III is a very, again, that's what we're going to be covering in 2 weeks' time. It's a great movie, but it's got some really unpleasant, nasty stuff in it. And then Star Trek IV is your recovery. It's you've had that, now you can have a bit of fun.
In this turbo lift scene, I love the small talk and the chit chat. And, you know, how's your hair's down? Is it regulation? I also really like what she's wearing, because it reminds me, even though it doesn't look specifically like that there's casual wear on the Enterprise. You know, I always enjoyed, you know, when Kirk would wear his green sort of wraparound tunic and would spend the whole episode in that. It's world building, you know, it's expanding the universe, that there's more going on than just the very cut and dry elements that we see on a usually weekly basis.
Exactly. I don't think this is casual wear particularly should be wearing now, because it does carry an insignia on it. And these were, in this era, these official casual wear. But of course, the insignias in this era were non-functional devices. They weren't the communicators that, of course, were introduced in the Next Generation era.
Did she change her hair? I hadn't noticed. There's some great humor in this movie. See, I don't even have to listen to it. I just know this movie back and forth. But it's... I think this movie also adds the real doses of humor that were sorely lacking in motion picture. And again, it's building on the camaraderie and the family and the relationships with everybody, but it's very well placed. And that can make or break a film, because everything afterwards, sometimes you've got the best of it, like in 4, and you've got the worst of it, like in 5.
Exactly, but I think that's what the humor is, what really makes it. I mean, what I think Kirk is very uptight in the motion picture. I think everyone is uptight, and what's quite interesting is you got to remember if you put yourself in the universe, the cadets in here, they are on a ship commanded by, let's face it, probably who they regard as a living legend, who is a senior officer, who's an admiral now, but he's also the pinnacle of captaincy, the one who everyone wants to be. There's a great quote in a future episode of Star Trek, which is, you can be an admiral, but everyone wants to be a captain. The seat is what everyone who joins Starfleet wants. And he is the captain of the captains. So to all these kids who are going around the ship, fresh out of the academy, they've got this living legend there. No one will say boo to a goose to him, because they're there. But at least with the friendships and the humor, you know that Spock, Scotty, and all of them, to an extent, but especially McCoy, won't regard rank as being, they know they can speak freely to him.
Indeed. I was noticing something I hadn't really thought about in the past, in that the Genesis scientist crew is like a microcosm of the Roddenberry shared, the sort of international, multiracial, everyone's on an even playing field kind of cast. And that's a nice thing to see. Leonard Nimoy was not happy with the design of his quarters in this for some reason. I've always thought it was really great, because I thought it felt very much like the original series, just in the way that it's
even with the Idic logo on it in sequins, it appears on his wall. Yes, as we know, Idic caused a lot of controversy.
Things. Isn't that a known fact?
Well, actually, David, I'll let you recount the story, as I'm sure you know it, to our audience. The story of the Idic and Gene Roddenberry.
You're putting me on the spot. The Idic?
The Idic medal.
Yeah. You know what? You are putting me on the spot. I need
Okay.
I need
That's
to
okay.
be
I'll recount it. It's quite an interesting one. Basically, there was that logo, which is the Vulcan logo there. There was an episode of the original series where Nimoy fell out with Roddenberry because Roddenberry tried to do some merchandising, which is where Kirk said, there was a scene scripted where Kirk would say to Spock, "Spock, what is that medal you've got?" And he'd hold it up to the camera as if to, "Oh, this? Well, this is my Idic. It means infinite diversity and infinite combinations, this medal, blah, blah, blah." And they did a whole little scene about it. And then it was going to be, you could that exactly, there we go. Someone, David has posted a screenshot of the medal. And the idea was you would be able to pay and order your own one at home, which is one of the most, from Gene Roddenberry, I would say, I'm going to say that's almost hypocritical, because the whole point of Star Trek in the future is that money is a non-entity.
It's starting to make sense though. Why? Because it was never explained exactly what specifically Leonard Nimoy did not like about that set, but that might be an in-your-face reminder of the merchandising of Star Trek and this moment with Roddenberry that he had a falling out with. But
I know they had several across the years.
Yeah. But one giant reminder on the wall of
what
something that you weren't happy about.
What I would say as well is I'm noticing the cadet uniforms are almost a halfway house of an evolution between the original series and the uniforms of Wrath of Khan. They are more like the jumpsuits.
The original series or the motion picture?
Sorry, motion picture. Sorry, motion picture. They're almost a halfway between.
Yeah, they're kind of wearing onesies. It's like they had some leftovers. Actually, if you look at the security guards in, I think there's a quick shot of security guards in Star Trek II. They're wearing the same security guard, helmet and things like that. That's a little goofy from the motion picture, and there is some carryover there, which I think is great, because I think rather than a complete disregard for the motion picture, there are elements, whether it's the little shuttle pods and how you get to the Enterprise rather than just simply beaming on, or some of the uniforms. I think there is some consistency there where you could say it's just an evolution. It's like, oh, this fall we got brand new uniforms for most of the people here. Do you qualify? You get to wear it.
But it could also be that the uniforms would be sort of designed and rolled out. Oh, just noticing there, Captain Tyrrell he's not blinked once.
He's in zombie mode.
But that's absolutely brilliant in the performance. That is absolutely a wonderful thing to see. But you can imagine, though, that the new uniforms would potentially be going to the senior officers first, to the commissioned, and then the kids would be maybe getting the newer ones later.
I mean, there's a whole structure, with these uniforms also, where you have a sort of a panel that comes down, and even though a lot of times they just sort of take it down, it sort of shows the sort of distressed or casual element during some, and it's perfect for a big spot of blood if you're in the middle of battle, just to
exactly. You can unbutton it, big white patch for someone to grasp your chest with their blood-covered hand.
That's the thing is, they'd always get the report about how many people, were killed or how many people were injured, but you never saw it because you didn't have time to show it. So there's an in-your-face reminder of the bloodshed of the crew, in the service of the cause. I mean, you look at Bill Shatner, he's smiling every step of the way. You're right. He's so uptight in the first one. There's this relaxed element that really goes a long way. And I think, especially like this scene, there's a dimension to Kirk that we'd never seen before. We didn't know, yes, we've seen him kiss half the women in the galaxy, whatever, color, blue, green, or whatever. But we didn't know that he has an old flame. And not only that, he has, a son that he's...
At least one child. With his many conquests,
one that he knows about, at least. Yes. Retinal. Here's a second thing with the eye. So his eyesight is not perfect, and he needs glasses for it. And then they're using a retinal scan, which is used in a lot of things. You know, Runaway uses a retinal scan. If you look at Never Say Never Again, they use a whole sequence to get through security using a reconstructed eye that matches a retinal scan. I think it's new technology that was written about, that was inspiring a lot of people in the 80s when they were screenwriting.
Now I'm going to just
about to see.
Go on, David. You go for it, because this is really important.
I'll serve it up, and you hit it. You hit the ball. But you know, some really early rendering and CGI, and you know, this is elements that no one had seen at this point, and so this was really impressive and radical for the time.
Oh, certainly. I mean, this is early. This is ILM again, very early, wasn't it? I believe. So this would be. This would actually predate the Knight in Sherlock Holmes, young Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, Sherlock Holmes was a couple of years later.
And of course, Amazing Stories as well. So this would be certainly some of their early work. And of course, the genesis of this, if you give the pun, we are seeing the birth of what became Pixar.
Pixar, so which is originally connected to, you go ahead.
Exactly. If not for this, we wouldn't have Woody and Buzz.
Exactly.
It's a direct line you can draw to it.
Yeah, Pixar was spun off of ILM, but ILM was always doing models, and they were doing effects work and animations and a variety of things, but they really didn't do a lot of computer work. And so Pixar was the arm and the offshoot of that that eventually was spun off, and I think they kind of regret that to this day to a certain point. But they developed their own in-house methods at ILM. And now here's some topical conversation here, you know, and you've got the passion of McCoy as the voice of reason, saying, you know, you think he's the doctor, arguably a scientist in terms of his thinking, and he's thinking specifically about the worst case scenario here, about what you can do with this in the wrong hands. Which also very much just a sit down and a debate about the potential catastrophe that could be caused with the weight of a weapon like this is what makes Khan getting it in his own hands such an amazing threat, you know, in this film.
Yeah. So I think it's also something that this movie doesn't quite mention so much about Khan, that I kind of, one of the only things I think, even after seeing Space Seed again today, I think with maybe something missing from the script would be a little more speaking about Khan and his ambitions, about wanting to conquer and rule. And I mean, obviously historically, that's obviously now he wants vengeance, but historically his whole thing was to conquer and rule planets eventually, once he learned there was space. Yeah,
you know, his goals are a lot more myopic in this one, and even his crew tells him that. He's just like, you've got a starship, you've got anything. We already had that scene, but you could do anything you want, yet you're obsessed with vengeance and revenge.
Exactly. So he's become completely consumed by it, because in Space Seed he wanted the Enterprise, he wanted a starship to conquer planets.
All right, now we have to draw attention to this scene. This is one of the most epic scenes in Star Trek, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because there's so many layers in terms of this confrontation. They don't know what they're up against, and they're keeping their guard down, and so they're basically falling into a wolf's trap right here.
Exactly.
And if you think of the dialogue, the effects, and the music and the editing, in terms of the build of the tension, it's quite much more complicated if you really think about how you construct a scene like this, especially when it comes to the music and the editing and the way they filmed the dialogue in terms of this build. It's masterful.
But what I'd say as well is this is one of the first times we ever see Federation ships attack Federation ships in Star Trek.
And yes, those are his abs. Those are not fake. Everyone has always asked, but he's a built gentleman, and there's no pecs added to his chest plate.
I've I've always likened this to a submarine battle.
And it's inspired.
Yeah.
This and the Mutara Nebula later, without spoiling things, is inspired by some of the great sub adventures in the past, you know, like with Robert Mitchum, and the name will come to me. But Nick Meyer, he saw this completely as naval battle 101,
Yeah.
And naval strategy 101. And that's why it is so exciting. Sorry, I'm excited. Other really amazing elements in here, which I think is cool. Of course, we have the classic. Everyone now jump to the left. Now jump to the right. They're doing the
That's
time
right.
warp. You know, while they just tilt the cameras and shake it a little bit. But I love how like there's these closing doors to keep everything sealed. That's something you hadn't seen in Star Trek before, which is very
which would be something you would
clever.
expect that they would have, of course. You know, they'd have bulkheads to shut various sections of the ship off.
Mm-hmm. In later Star Trek episodes or movies and episodes, they basically just put up a force field and it's all convenient. But here, everything is mechanical, which is great. You know, for all the future tech there is on in these movies, there's a sort of analog feel to a lot of the sort of the motivations for the way the ship works, and that's also very appealing and of its time as well, and it makes sense. I always love how Spock is pointing to the blinking red lights as if Kirk couldn't figure that out himself.
It's just, I just love this scene. They don't know what's going on. From their point of view, why are they being attacked by a Federation ship?
I got caught up watching it. It's great.
Yeah,
and there's elements.
Yeah,
elements here that again with the strategy that I was talking about, where there's strategic play at work when he's confronting Khan. You know, because he still has a better working knowledge. Here's the thing where, as a captain, you have to know your ship. You have the best captains are the ones who know how to do everything, yet they are the ones just there making the decision, so everyone else does their job to the best of their ability. And so having a working knowledge of a starship and what it can do and codes to bring down,
exactly.
someone else. I always found that wonderfully convenient, and still one of the greatest moments in Star Trek history is this scene. And caught with his britches down, he's put him on screen. We're like doomed already. What's happening?
Well, one thing I quite like this, and something I think that Next Generation and possibly some of that era has ruined, is that Kirk, being Admiral, would just be able to communicate with the computer in the other ship and just lock them all out. In the Next Generation era, you just go, this is Admiral Kirk, authorization, whatever, lock all controls of the ship out, and it'd be done.
This set the tone. This very much set the tone.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing about this shoot was that there was a lot more levity than the first one, but there was also a lot of neurosis going on too. Ike Eisenman gave me a taste of that. There was a little bit of each. There was a lot of happiness, but a lot of people didn't know if this was. Yeah. We all know it was such a great film, but when they were shooting this, didn't know if they were going to be able to do it again. And even though Leonard.
I've always thought this shot of Khan, though, one thing I've always found is he looks like he's on a green screen for some reason with his background. I've always thought.
Yeah, it's a little flat. It might have been a reshoot. Who knows? It might have been an element where they felt the need to redo. I'm completely. I don't have the knowledge here. No, but okay. There are a lot of times where you put the whole piece together. And you say, this isn't working, that's not working, this needs a little element here, and you do reshoots.
It's still wonderful. Sorry, you were saying though that they really enjoyed filming.
Yeah, there was more levity. There was a lot of levity on the first one because they had a lot of time on their hands because they were getting new script pages by the hour on the first motion picture. And so there's a lot of times where there's a lot of indecision, so they just have a lot of time to just sort of kill, so they entertain themselves. But the second one was a lot more serious because they got a second chance, but they also didn't know if this was going to be a hit or this was going to be it. But there were lots of moments of just absolute levity, but there was also a balance of neurosis. Nimoy is a bit of a method actor, so he'd be in Spock mode, and Kirk is a bit of a method. Shatner is a bit of a method actor as well, so he'd kind of parade around as Kirk the entire time, and it sort of built, it sort of reinforced this us versus them element of the Kirk, Spock, McCoy trio versus the rest of the cast, which created some of the umbrage that lasts to this day. That actor with Khan also, he was a well-known TV actor. His name is escaping me for a moment, but he
appeared in actually the same episode of, he appeared in Symbiosis alongside Merrick Buttrick as the opposite side, and he also appeared as a Romulan in another episode of Voyager quite a while later.
There was an actor, Mark Leonard, who was a variety of aliens, and he of course played Sarek, Spock's father, but he was he's played Klingons, he's played Romulans, balance.
I believe he played one of the Klingons in the motion picture who doesn't speak as such.
Yep. And so it's kind of nice, it's basically rewarding a lot of these folks being able to just sort of come back, because people, at the end of the day, these guys are hanging out with people for long hours on the set, and they want to be with people that they like. So they bring in people they like back. Where's the override?
What I would say is, and again, this is something that's changed because the world of computers has changed since this. A security code of 16309 is not very secure for a starship.
Well, originally it was 8675309, but they said that's too close to the song. So
yeah, Jenny wasn't happy about that.
Yes, exactly. Thanks for getting that reference. All this stuff, amazing storyboards ahead of time. They did this way ahead of time, and they kind of built the script around these sequences as well, because they had to get things in motion at ILM early on. And the reason why they went with ILM was because it was just such a mess in terms of the effects for the first film. It almost derailed the entire film and its delivery. So this time around, they wanted to put it in the hands and spend the money on people who really know what they were doing. And were much
exactly. I mean, one of the things that, again, when we eventually if we do Star Trek 5, the ILM weren't available for Star Trek 5 because they were working on The Last Crusade. So it went to another company. Oh, and this is a scene I have problems with here, but we'll say Scotty was upset.
Because you're like, why did he take him here instead of to the medical bay?
Yes.
No.
It's a bit strange, but yes, which is why in Star Trek 5, a lot of the effect shots are very inconsistent, like the scale of the Enterprise is all over the place compared to things in 5. But here we go, seeing McCoy doing some doctoring.
Yeah, this is Ike Eisenman. In the director's edition, there's more moments with Peter Preston, but this is his big moment, and he did not know that he filmed so much more. And when he told all his friends, let's all watch this movie together, he hadn't seen the final cut, and so he's like, what happened to half of my role? But it carries some weight.
And this is
there
where
you see the blood on the lapel.
I was going to say it's convenient that he'd opened the flap on his tunic on the way down there for whatever reason. And of course, as Sparky John just commented, that was Scotty's nephew.
Yeah, Scotty's nephew, which is why it meant so much. But this is stuff that is missed in a trim down for to expedite the story. It's just a little too much information that you just couldn't quite insert and make it make sense.
Well, I think in some ways it may be his nephew, but I think it possibly strengthens Scotty as a character by it not being stated as his nephew, because it shows that he recognized that he was a competent young engineer who was really proud, and he, some kind of a fathering type thing amongst his cadets.
Absolutely. Here's another scene. If you watch it from the standpoint of a Star Trek context, it's a scary scene with some really dark elements. I mean, there are strung up dead bodies. I mean, what Khan does to this crew is really ruthless.
It's Predator style stuff almost. But he's it appears with a lot of them, he's hung them upside down and slit their throats.
Yeah,
but Tyrrell states later Tyrrell states later he tortured them. So you can imagine they possibly had them upside down, and he was burning them, stabbing them, or doing whatever he was doing to them before he finally cut their throats. He was known, again, and this is something that's mentioned in Space Seed. He was known to be a butcher.
Yeah, he was a genocidal maniac. You know, he was a huge known criminal on Earth, in Earth's future, our future. Although it would have been cool if he got the Reliant only to fly to get his original ship from Space Seed and use that as his vessel. That would be kind of
the bottom. I'm sorry, I didn't rename it the Botany Bay. That would have been kind of cool. In the line,
Botany Bay 2.
Yeah.
Like the Audrey 2 in Little Shop of Horrors, the Botany Bay 2. All right, everyone in the turbo lift. Yeah, there's a whole dark element here that, you know, with the music, the shadowy elements. We see their away team uniforms, which is kind of cool.
That's very cool. What I was going to say is about the shadowiness of it. The lighting on this movie is incredible, even on the miniatures. The shot we saw earlier where the Reliant flies over the Enterprise and it does pass a proper shadow over the Enterprise is just wonderful model work.
And it's again, I think the Holiday Inn quote unquote element of Star Trek: The Motion Picture bothered Nick Meyer so much that he really wanted to make this a very moody and atmospheric film. He wanted it to be claustrophobic. He didn't want that bridge to look like there was a lot of space. He wanted to feel like you were just in the lower decks.
Exactly. I mean, and I wonder if, especially with earlier Next Generation, where Gene Roddenberry had an element of greater control in earlier Next Generation, someone described the Enterprise D in the first few series of Next Generation as a floating Marriott Convention Center, which I kind of would agree with. It was very, like you say, the Holiday Inn in space would have come from Roddenberry. I'm not sure space rats, but we'll go with that.
I like the space rats and the slow back into the dangling body.
Yeah,
we're about to get our first jump scare in Star Trek. Oh. That's great. That's great. Look at that. I just love it. I just love it. I mean, it's horrible. It's awful. But I mean, it's just it's another example of there's ways to, it's good writing. There are ways to build any character where the things that are the consequences of their actions speak more about the character than the character talking about themselves.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost like a lot of times actors like to play villains because even if they're in the movie for 5 minutes, the entire movie beginning to end, people are talking about how they fear that person and they name check him all throughout the entire film. So Khan is very similar.
That's actually something Ricardo Montalban said in an interview about this movie, that he felt that even though he isn't in the movie a great deal, when he's not on screen, everyone's talking about him and wanting to know and wondering about him. So he's kind of the star, even though he's not in it that much. And it's similar in a way to, of all the strange things, Jaws. Basically, when he's not on screen, you want to know where he is and what he's doing, and you're always worried he's just there somewhere.
I want to note real quickly that when they discover Chekov at first, he looks like he's dead.
Yes.
And I always love that sort of throwaway shot because, I mean, they save it very quickly 2 shots later where he's talking. But there's that quick moment where like, oh my God, did they just kill Chekov? That just like that, you don't even see it and he's gone. It's pretty intense. This is kind of a TV framing, if you think about it. You know, you've got all the characters facing
quite
the
close.
Camera. This reminds me of a moment where, and this is not meant to be a slight, but there are times, if you think about the hundreds and hundreds of setups that you have to decide how you're going to do it. or how much time you have to shoot a scene, block a scene, rehearse a scene, and then shoot it. How much coverage you're going to get. So a shot like this, where it's a one take, where they're all in the same shot, it smacks of we're running out of time, we're behind schedule, and so we need to get this entire scene, and we won't have time for the over the shoulders and establishing shots. Just put everyone in the frame, and then we'll pull out slowly and get it all in one shot. And if we can get our coverage, great. Now, I don't know if that's true for this particular moment, but that very much smacks of the type of problems that directors come up against, because a lot of times you think, well, they have all the time, they have millions of dollars, but that's really not the case. You usually find yourself painting yourself in the corner quite a bit in terms of your coverage and time, or lack thereof. Quality time in the transporter room, which we haven't had yet in this movie.
No. And it's also a non-Federation kind of transporter room we're seeing. It doesn't appear to be the same kind of technology as on the Enterprise.
Also, we're back to, even though they're a little oversized, we're back to flip communicators, which are a welcome missing element of the first, where they use sort of their Apple Watch wrist,
No, they were the belt buckles, weren't they, almost?
No, they had Fitbits.
Did they?
They had funky belt buckles, but they also had like a wrist communicator Fitbit kind of thing that was, not my favorite.
No.
I mean, if you think about it, there's certain hardware in Star Trek and sound effects that are incredibly important, whether it's the opening of the communicator, whether it's the sound of the bridge, which they incorporate very specifically in the Enterprise A when they get their new Enterprise. There are certain things that they bring back for just the visual or the oral nostalgia for Star Trek fans.
Exactly. I mean, the interesting thing about the communicator that you're speaking about there, the communicator of Star Trek was so influential. There's a gentleman by the name of John Cooper who was regarded as the father of modern cell phones. And he said his direct inspiration for the cell phone when he was working at Motorola was Kirk's communicator from Star Trek.
Absolutely. The future is now. And it went away, but apparently it's coming back. I think they're coming back with some flip phones. All right.
And again, something I like here is this is, even in these jackets they're wearing, these sort of warm away team coats that they're wearing, they're grounded in reality. In the original series, they'd probably have been foil with glitter and... And it was an aesthetic of the era, but it's about that more realistic grounding to everything.
Additional pockets for survival materials. I'm sure they've got their rations in there, and so on and so forth.
You can imagine they've got like a medical kit and a battery and a torch and
reinforced elbows, which are very important.
That's right.
Oh, amazing battle here. This is also great too. I mean, if you think about how certain characters meet and their relationship that we know of, it's an unexpected confrontation, which is great.
And we see Shatner doing some classic Kirk fighting here.
Right, he's doing a little Kirk fu.
Yeah.
Ready to do it. And now he's looking at him like, hey, he looks really familiar. I wonder why. Because he's got my genes. Of course not. It's just a wonderful humanizing moment too. I wish all fights could be just sort of deflated immediately by familial elements. All right, now here we get the wonderful return of the Ceti Alpha,
the eel,
making their appearance, which is great.
Again, one thing I'm not sure in Khan's plan, I can assume he's only because he was waiting for Kirk. If he wanted Genesis, the Chekov and Tyrrell could have beamed down at any time because the transporter had been left with the coordinates of where Genesis was.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. It's where some of the logic of the choices where it would be more convenient to, achieve A, B, or C, then that deprives us of some of these great moments. You know,
But I like to think that you can see that Khan is so emotionally distraught by all this. You can see it is paining him to do all this, that his thought process maybe isn't as clear as it should be.
Also, if you look at it, Tyrell is talking with his wrist communicator and not a flip communicator, which is an interesting decision that they have both of those. That's a bit of a carryover too. But this is a great moment. I think Paul Winfield gives such a wonderful performance. It's a bit overlooked because of Khan, you know, but of course Chekov's, you know, Walter Koenig's performance here is very Chekovian. All right, back to ILM, and we have a squishy Ceti eel coming out in a close-up of a fabricated ear, but it's still awesome.
It is. It's still a
that
scene you look
shot at
at.
ILM, by the way, post-production. And if you think about it, though, it's a setup and a payoff. You know, they didn't necessarily have to show that, but if you think about it, whenever you're watching Chekov the entire time, at some point he's got to rid himself. He's got to expunge that infestation. So the fact that it comes out in such a dramatic fashion with blood, with some goopy, jammy blood, I think is really great.
Chekov, you got to say, in the Star Trek trilogy, as we're referring to, 2, 3, and 4, he's really the one who takes the most punishment.
Star Trek 1, he burns his wrist. Star Trek 2, we see what's happening here. Star Trek 3, what punishment?
3, I think he relatively okay on 3, but in 4, don't forget he nearly bleeds to death.
That's brain. Right. Well, he fell off the Enterprise, the nuclear vessel.
That's right.
And for a moment, a delusion of grandeur that is like rank admiral.
That's right.
Good stuff. Yeah, I had the wonderful opportunity to talk to Walter Koenig for In Search of Tomorrow, and he really relished having an expanded role for this. And of course, you know, you ask him, well, you weren't on the Botany, you know, how do you know about the Botany Bay? You weren't on that episode. And I asked that about to Nicholas Meyer as well, because it had to be asked, and I don't want to give too much away. But
no, we got to keep some secrets.
Yeah. But well, one that's not going to make the cut is like no one's going to say no if you give them more scenes to chew. You know, no one's going to say, "Well, I wasn't in that episode of Star Trek. You better get why don't you get George Takei for this episode, for this scene?" You know, it's just not going to happen. There's the memeable moments right there, right?
Oh yes, come on, Discord chat, get it out your system. Everyone in Discord, yeah.
Gone. Right. All those little capsule things look like they're left over from from NASA, and they just they're all miniatures and they dressed them up.
But again, I love the aesthetic of this because the tunnels are, as stated in a moment, they were dug out by engineers and they look like they've been sort of dug, machined like proper tunnels. It just looks real.
Absolutely. And they apparently didn't encounter any hortas along the way, you know, which are, you know, the devil in the dark little creature with the silver eggs. But they did that at this planet because it was a barren planet. There are no living creatures, and they were able to do it. It was part of their ethos to make sure that there was no life whatsoever. I just wanted an opportunity to throw in the horta, you know.
Oh, okay. From Devil in the Dark.
Yeah, exactly. And the salt. Which basically always makes me want pizza, or at least just sort of melted mozzarella afterwards. And this is great also in that this conversation is ultimately leading to a throwback to the Kobayashi Maru, which is a theme and a concept that everyone has loved so much ever since, because it's been referred to myriad times in Star Trek as the Kobayashi Maru, and that it ultimately signifies the no-win situation. So it's a test of character. Yet we all know Kirk cheated, which of course was, you know, a prime moment in the Star Trek reboot with Chris Pine.
Yeah,
you get to see that moment in the Kobayashi Maru, where he's eating way too much of an apple while he's
yeah. The issue I have with that one is he's disciplined for it, and in this one he's commended for it,
right,
which is a bit
times change.
Now the interesting thing is, referring to Chekov, I'm going to see if our Discord community know this. Why was Chekov added? This question for our Discord community.
We'll see.
See if anyone comes up with the answer. Why was Chekov added to the original Star Trek cast?
While you guys are talking, I'll be back in one moment.
Yeah, sure thing, David. Okay, Atta Prime says instead of Geordie, O'Brien must suffer. Is Chekov must suffer? Not quite. Mr. Furs looks he needs someone Polish. No. Network Nerd because they needed his gun. No. I'm sure someone. No. Sparky Jar. It wasn't the Russian space race. Mad Matt has it. Monkey Mania. Chekov was added as eye candy for the young ladies who were obsessed with the TV show The Monkees, which was hugely popular at the time, and he was a kind of a knockoff Davy Jones, added to try to get the young ladies interested, get a new demographic for the series. Here we're seeing a great scene between Kirk and Dr. Marcus, just discussing their lives. Oh, Davy Jones, not Davy Jones. And Mr. Phil, you daydream believer. Oh, don't. That's a pun. That's a real pun, isn't it? I actually had the pleasure of speaking to Davy many, many years ago before he passed, and he was a wonderful, wonderful, warm, lovely gentleman to speak to.
Davy Jones?
That's right, yeah. Many years ago, about 20 years ago, I spoke to him, and he was a lovely man.
Yep, combination of a beetle slash a monkey slash we want a young person that all the teens can get all excited about. And
is that something you
never expected to stick around as long as he did, because he thought he was going to be like working for a couple of days, and that was that. And this is a great moment with BB Besh as well.
Yes.
Can I cook or what? I mean, she's got her moment to shine here. There's absolute pride, and you look at what they're looking at. They're looking at like a wall.
Yeah.
They're looking at lights and a wall, and of course fill in the effects on the other side. So they really sell what the visual is ultimately going to be.
What I would say is it's something I miss in a lot of modern movies that this had, and so many Star Trek movies and great sci-fi movies the 80s had these wonderful matte paintings.
Very much so. A lost art, because it's all done digitally now.
Yeah.
I think occasionally when people are working with budgets or it's a very specific choice, matte paintings still do get used. But, the lost art of the Harrison Ellenshaws and the Ralph McQuarries and incredibly talented artists who would, whether it was a conceptual artist or it would be, making these amazing matte paintings, which you see so much during the 80s. It's almost kind of a hallmark. If you think about that decade and you think about, prior to it as well, but very specifically the 80s decade is when you think of effects, you think of very much the ILM style effects. You think of very much of matte paintings, and you think about a certain bar that was set during that time, which has ultimately been replaced.
I've got a question from Aaron for you, David. Without revealing too much, because again, of course, you can't reveal everything, will the effects techniques of the 80s, such as matte paintings, be discussed in Search of Tomorrow?
Proudly.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And now we're seeing here almost a bit of symbolism of the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, etc., with Kirk in this Garden of Eden eating an apple created by Genesis.
Aha. Garden of Eden. And this is also great too, because I think for anyone who wasn't really paying attention at the time, they're realizing that they were using code.
Yes.
which is not very well disguised code, but I guess if you're not following it, it's no big deal. And they explain it. But I think I even remember the first time I saw this, I was a bit befuddled. I'm like, wait, they were trapped and they could have come up this whole time? Okay.
Yes, exaggeration code.
Yep.
What I quite like about this is, though, you can feel it's very much, it's like, right, Kirk's with the crew, Spock's got everything ready. It's the unit of the Enterprise crew working properly.
And this particular shot is one of my favorites. You know, you've got this whole massive planetoid, and you've got both ships on the top and the bottom right there.
Yeah. And again, the wonderful
there's
score.
certain elements that, like, you sorry to interrupt, but you have, like, you know, even J.J. Abrams is a student of this, where the action is that you have people moving and running and doing other things while they're trying to complete a task or get to a point. And that keeps everything kinetic for the viewer. It's exciting. I mean, the fact that literally he's just being caught up while he's putting on his uniform and running down the corridors of the Enterprise to get to the bridge. I mean, it's basic, but it's exciting because they could have just cut to him getting right onto the bridge.
But also, it's more exciting for the viewers with the energy it puts into it while he's doing, if he's multitasking, running and doing that and getting ready and going up a ladder at the same time. There's a sense of urgency rather than him stood there putting his robe on, checking it all, and then walking up the corridor. And
and he's chewing gum at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
Here they have their vacuum cleaners. We've got the red alert sign just to let us know where we are. Another vacuum cleaner. We just need to vacuum clean the ship. But here's another element too that they discussed it very specifically, because there was like, this is the first time you ever see the launching of a torpedo in a torpedo.
That's right.
In Star Trek, and this is something that was very important to Nicholas Meyer, to demonstrate this sort of nautical feel. It's like, if you're going to shoot a torpedo, we all want to see that torpedo loaded.
Well, exactly, because we've always heard that. We've always heard starships carry a complement of photon torpedoes, as in they're not something that's generated. A phaser is supposed to be an energy weapon. They've got an infinite supply of phaser firing, but they only have 50 or 100 or whatever torpedoes. So it's nice to actually see that they are a thing that has to be loaded in, very much like a torpedo, as you'd see in the old submarine films, going back to that, where they'd open up the big thing, wheel it on the trolley and get it all in like that. So it's kind of cool. And you can see the ships getting ready for battle.
And another element, if you look closely at the attention to detail, is that the reflection of the purple elements and the deeper color elements are reflected on the hulls of the ship. I mean, that's something that you would normally take for granted, but someone thought of that to really sell this idea that they're in the Mutara Nebula. So prior to this, you don't have it, but now that they're entering this element, it's all reflected on the ship. And again, you look at later Star Trek battles in space, the ships are a lot brighter. These, they're still dark, and they're using their own lighting to reflect, being able to be seen in the darkness of space.
Well, there's also quite an interesting thing you can see as a difference between the Enterprise bridge and the Reliant bridge that shows the difference in the training. The Enterprise bridge, of course, is following the Starfleet rules. They have engaged red alert. The ship is prepared for battle. The lights have turned red. Obviously, the bridge is dark. Khan's bridge is just it's like they've not bothered to set the ship in the right mode. We're just going to attack.
Nicholas Meyer was always a very self-effacing kind of guy, which is very wonderful when he's telling a story. He was not a fan of his choice to have David wear the sweater over his shoulder as a little sort of tied cape. He's like, I regret that choice.
Yeah, he looks like he's going to a country club.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when they're about to go in the heat of battle. He's just like, where's my lounge chair and margarita? More power right in the face.
I like to kind of imagine that Khan's if you take it like a car, because Khan's not very well trained right now, he's got the car doing like 80 miles an hour in first gear because he doesn't really understand everything.
But yeah, even just some of the dialogue that they haven't gotten to yet, sauce for the goose, Mr. Savick, there's elements where these guys, even though they're putting themselves in a handicap of a situation in terms of their maneuverability, they know that they have their advantage because of their tactical training. And that's what's so wonderful. It's like, you as a viewer know, even though besides the fact that these are our heroes, you know that they're well trained to manage something like this, even though it's a hindrance to their navigation.
Yeah, exactly. Because Khan may be a genius himself, but they are not an experienced, trained crew. They're people who've had, at best, a few hours of operating this ship. They're not experienced on everything.
Mm-hmm. Demonstrates two-dimensional thinking.
Yeah.
And add some lightning. If you think about it also, it's again a haunted house element to this specific area, you know, whether it was the space station on, what was it, Regular One, you know, there's sort of real dark, moody, atmospheric elements to make it a memorable moment and a memorable tale. It's
wonderful. It's just such, the effects are so, the atmosphere is so wonderful. You can see they're basically, they could near enough bump into each other without even realizing until they hit.
And they almost do.
Yeah. I mean, I like to think that Kirk has quite possibly even got some people physically looking out the windows on the front of the Enterprise relaying, can you see the Reliant?
There is an element also in Star Trek that I've always grappled with in terms of my personal understanding, because I always thought it was a window, and then I realized it was a screen. But then there's an element where it can be both. You know, you could use it as a window, at least in some Star Trek somewhere, unless I'm...
In some it can, but in some models of the Enterprise, this is I'm really geeky, the actual bridge is not even fully lined up directly with the front of the ship. It's in facing forwards.
Like it's sideways or something? What do you mean?
Yeah. Because it doesn't necessarily face straight forward in certain Starfleet ships, but you always see forwards.
Well, I remember as a kid, I figured they're right in the front of the ship, like in the front of the saucer, and I figured it out pretty quickly. But I remember it was a bit of a revelation for myself that the bridge was at the top of that sort of tip of the central element of the saucer. Here they are, smashing and destroying the Enterprise set. And I'm sure after they shot this, a bunch of sticky fingers stole things for mementos.
Well, don't forget
that was a big problem that they had on this movie.
Yeah.
People were taking mementos left and right, and a lot of sticky fingers.
Well, don't forget as well that because I believe a lot of the set was damaged, was water damaged between Star Trek's 3 and 4, which is why the Enterprise A set in Star Trek 4 looks so bad. And you see it so briefly. You look at the flooring, for example, it's all coming up, it's all rippled, the sort of the stuck down flooring.
Oh, really? You can notice it on screen?
Yeah, you can see
I have to watch that now.
And again, this is something for Star Trek 4 that's not for this, about the Enterprise A. You actually see the Enterprise A earlier in Star Trek 4 than at the end of the movie.
Yes.
And it's a very, very dark story.
Wait, say that again. I'm listening and watching.
Star Trek 4, at the end where they get the Enterprise A,
right?
Where they say, and they realize the ship's got lots of problems in Star Trek 5. The Enterprise A was actually another ship that's featured in Star Trek 4. The captain of the Yorktown that says, basically, our engineer is deploying a solar sail with hopes of keeping us alive.
Right.
That is the ship.
Uh-huh.
So everyone on the ship died. They took it back to the starbase. They towed it to the starbase and rechristened it the Enterprise A because no one wants to go in the death ship.
That story is above my geek pay grade, and I'm glad you told it. That's great. I was going to say prior to this, you finally have Chekov reuniting with the cast on the bridge, and they take a moment to celebrate that bit. And it's really nice because it's once again sort of a reunion of sorts, because it isn't until this moment really that you have the entire original crew cast together.
What I would say about this movie is I didn't appreciate how light on Uhura and Sulu this movie is until now.
Mm-hmm.
It's very light on the two of them, but yet again, I think in 3 they got given. I think they realised how much they needed to give them a few few more
Yeah,
words.
they get there. Well, the more films they were doing, the more they said, I want a bit, I want a moment, I want something more for my character. They recognize that they're not the leads, but they really felt like the fact that they kept on coming back for more, they wanted something more to do than just, head warp factor 1, whatever it may be, aye, Captain. So that was part of their personal struggles also when they were relegated to do something super simple. But some held a grudge more than others in terms of what they were allowed to do in one film and then back to square one in a follow-up film.
Oh, Aaron has another question for you, David. And again, I don't know how much of this you're going to be able to answer, which is, have you been in the same room with any or many of the models used in Star Trek or Star Wars? If so, how big and impressive were they?
Yes, I have seen, and yes, I have been, and there's always multiple sizes, and so I've seen the Tantive 4 from the opening shot of Star Wars, and I found that the Rebel blockade runner, and I was there's different sizes for different shots, but the one I saw, which is primarily used in one of the key moments of that opening scene, it's this big, it's tiny, so it's pretty amazing. And walking around the halls of ILM, it's pretty fun because they have a lot of this stuff on display, and in a stairwell they have the 2 ships from Galaxy Quest just hanging from the ceiling. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I love this with Khan. He's just vengeance. That's all he cares about now.
And we didn't really talk about Vengeance of Khan versus Wrath of Khan.
No. Go on.
Well, it was originally called Vengeance of Khan, but they were fine with that until it was pointed out that Revenge of the Jedi was on its way, and because Paramount did Indiana Jones movies. And they had a relationship with Lucas, and Star Trek is Paramount as well. It was brought to someone's attention that without ruffling other feathers, we better change it. There's more to that story, but that's a simplified version. And they did. And then everyone's like, what's wrath? What does that mean? Nicholas Meyer was he tells wonderful tales of the Paramount brass and how they had no clue other than the bottom line, and how sometimes it's very easy and very difficult to persuade them on one idea or another, but it always came down to money.
Oh, Spock.
Yeah, and David wearing his battle fatigue sweater.
He's just put his tennis racket back in the cupboard.
We kid, but at least he's getting to hang out with his dad in this scene, which is cool.
Yeah.
There's that moment. This is such a great, it's such a great moment. When you can look at a character and see what they're thinking and know exactly what they're thinking, what they're doing, it's not something to be taken for granted.
No, I mean,
there's so much
Nimoy was
a
wonderful.
where they just lift an eyebrow and you know exactly what they think and need to do. And that's, again, wonderful writing rather than just exposition.
Oh, and the acting as well. I mean, you can see him, you can clearly see him having the conversation with himself internally. I must walk down to engineering. I must get the power back online so we can all escape. It will kill me, but it's a worthwhile sacrifice.
With McCoy, very important. We all know now, but you look at this moment. At this point, Spock was going to die, and that was that. It was in the script. He was going to die. No more Spock after that. But as they were filming this, they realized it was going very well. Leonard Nimoy was really enjoying himself. There was talk of doing more. And Nicholas Meyer said, I killed Spock in this movie. We can't fake it. Otherwise, we're going to disappoint everybody. But Paramount said, no, we're going to bring him back. And Nicholas Meyer said, ain't going to happen on my watch. So they filmed it separately, where he implants his, was it Katra, into
his
McCoy.
essence,
Yeah. a little Vulcan trick to bring on a third Star Trek big screen movie. And anyway, that was shot without Nicholas Meyer's involvement. But he today recognizes that, he understands that the franchise is the franchise, and sci-fi, you could do anything, and Paramount is not going to kill a key character if they can bring him back in some way, shape, or form. And I'll just say that they did ask him to shoot Star Trek 3, and he didn't want to do it because he didn't like the idea of bringing Spock back after he killed him. So that was essentially why he said, no thanks.
But again, this scene is one that's shaped all Star Trek again going forwards. The whole needs of the many.
The needs of the few or the one, indeed.
Yep. Exactly. And it's a Star Trek staple moment that's just, and this is such a tense scene.
Inverted the other way around in the subsequent films. The needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many, because they're like, well, okay, listen, sacrifice, some for many, but now it's flip side because we're family and we're friends, and we will jeopardize our careers to bring you back.
You can see Khan's pleasure is that Kirk will die, and that's all he cares about.
Right, and a little Shakespeare goes a long way in Star Trek as well. Arguably, this is Ricardo Montalban's greatest role. It is for us, surely, but you really didn't see him on television doing that much.
No.
In film, he's been able to do things, but it wasn't. By this time, again, like I said, he's Mr. Rourke in Fantasy Island. So he kind of got this one last hurrah to really just chew up the scenery and make it his own.
No, this is just wonderful. Just seeing, and I'm glad even in the director's cut they resisted the urge to add an energy wave to the explosion.
No need. It's right there. You got these wonderful rings that sort of appear. It really sells the idea that this was not just your standard bargain basement explosion. And talking about the sequels a little bit, I do remember I really did enjoy Saavik and Kirstie Alley as Saavik. I thought that was an interesting character. And while Robin Douglas as Saavik in Star Trek,
Robin Curtis.
Thank you very much. Robin Curtis did a wonderful job in Star Trek 3. It was an unfair scenario for her to sort of have to fill in those shoes, but it wasn't interesting typical character. But that was probably my biggest distraction with Star Trek 3.
Exactly. That was a real shame.
Now, Robin Douglas, was that Battlestar Galactica?
I would have to check Robin Douglas. I can't remember Robin.
My brain went there, so now I need to know. Let's see, Robin Douglas.
She's an actress. Certainly is.
This is a different one.
Very different lady.
Different contemporary actor. Let's see.
But we can see this is such a great scene where Kirk has just had to run and he's got acceptance now. He can't get to his friend.
Oh, Galactica 80.
Oh gosh, yes.
So there's a Galactica.
That didn't happen.
Anyway, sorry, I got stuck on Robin Douglas
That's
while
okay.
the intense scene in Star Trek history is going on. But this is wonderful because they're separated, but they could see each other. And this is the first time you ever seen Kirk really break down. It's pretty intense.
It's as well. I mean, Nimoy's performance here is wonderful. The way he's I think it's implied Spock's blind at the moment. The way he's kind of staggering on, which you can understand from that bright light, it may well have blinded him.
Yeah. Well, I'd be dazed and confused if I put my face in full blast of radiation. But this was a very intense scene, and this is a scene where when they filmed it, even there was not a dry eye in the house among the crew. Everyone really felt the weight of it.
I remember seeing this as a child, and I was crying. It used to make me cry as a child, this scene.
There's a certain element of finality to this as well. I mean, there's a certain cynicism, maybe not cynicism, but we're so used to everyone coming back or not dying, or it's a fake out. When this came out, I knew that he was going to die from this moment, and you feel the weight and the emotion of it. You really do.
Well, I think as well, Spock was always one of those characters that never died, especially from the TV eras. Your heroes never died back then on TV. So you had Spock, you had the Bionic Man. He was one of those kind of people. He was one of those tentpole characters. You knew that Steve Austin would never die. Spock would always be there the next week, especially because your experience of Star Trek being very much a bottle show historically, whereby the chess pieces were always put back at the start, at the end of every episode for the next time round. Seeing one of these characters that have just always been there die like this is quite a big thing.
Although in the series they were a little loosey goosey with the deaths of characters sometimes. I think Kirk died easily twice during.
But he always came back by the end of the episode.
Yeah.
You had that assurance that you knew he'd be back the following week.
Exactly. Although I was a kid when I watched that stuff, so I bought it hook, line, and sinker. Oh my God, they killed Kirk. This is a big deal. But it's such a great shot there. They're lost. He's so lost without his friend.
Yeah.
Got Scotty with the bagpipes. And also they're getting lots of mileage out of that torpedo bay that they built.
Yeah.
And I'm joking, but it's true. If you think about this, they thought, there was thought put behind what do we do with the body? Where's it go? How does it play into the story? What's the best send-off in terms of a nautical send-off? You put the body out to sea, So
exactly, as they used to do.
So it's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you look at Alien, a couple of years later, they put a body out to space. It's a different story.
Oh, and another Kirk line that everyone quotes is where he says human.
Human.
Yeah.
That's right.
Human. I say, kind of choking on, but to be fair, he's choking on the words, isn't he?
Right?
You can tell he's on the verge of crying. And even Savick, the Vulcan, is shedding a tear there.
Half Vulcan, right? Half Vulcan, half Romulan. That's never. Is that mentioned in the film?
I don't believe it is
mentioned in the film. But yeah, she's half. Kirstie Alley would always talk about how she was half Vulcan, half Romulan, and not full on Vulcan. Thus, the hair down and the bit of a glint in her eye at the end there.
I even love the score, the way James Horner took Amazing Grace into the big orchestral score here.
Wonderful swell. Then you've got the sort of the birth of a new star, a new life. It's very sort of metaphysical going on here with the funeral for Spock. But there's some wonderful codas here. He's now finishing his book. He's getting some quality time with his son. They could have just ended it there, but there's some character work to be finished here. Broke his glasses, comes into play later.
It does.
Star Trek 4. Sells it to the antique dealer.
And that's his copy of a tale.
He is to get it later, and it'll be fixed. Nicholas Meyer is a very erudite, very well educated, very smart guy, and he's very literate. He writes a lot. He just wrote a new Sherlock Holmes adventure just a couple, last year or so. So that is a very important element, all these things to play into larger literature and stories. Tale of Two Cities.
We can still see here though, Kirk is just broken. He's never, as you said, he's never dealt with this before. He's never had to experience this before.
And he's never had to lose. This is his Kobayashi Maru. And that's the thing.
He's not lost some faceless red shirt.
There's also another element which I think is interesting is you look at the shirt that David's wearing, there's clearly an element for the insignia there, but he's not Starfleet. So he doesn't get to wear it. So it's kind of cool that they're like, well, you know, we rescued you. We have to give you some clothes, but you're not going to get an insignia because you're not part of the crew or Starfleet. Starfleet adjacent, basically.
Yeah.
But very dark. I mean, think about that, how dark it is in that his quarters.
I do find it quite, one thing I do find strange about the film so far is Carol does seem to disappear largely from the movie. She appeared on the bridge and at the funeral, but she's not really in much more of the movie. Yep.
I can't quite justify why that is, other than she is not the point here. The point here is the next step, the next generation, the next evolution. You know, so he's meeting his son and he's got to connect. You know, he's not looking to rekindle with her as a love interest. He's looking to connect with, you know, his son.
I mean, there could have been a scene where she's come to him and said, "Do you want to talk?" Because I mean, he's got to just leave me alone. So, you know, something we've not seen, because he's clearly not dealing with Spock's death well.
Well, clearly, to answer your question, they said we need to put her in here so she hasn't disappeared completely. So she gets to hang out and look at Genesis and her creation, and they get to talk about it. But here's the denouement right here, where he talks about what this all means, and I think when they spell it out, it's poignant. That's right. Well, think about what McCoy said. He's really not dead as long as we remember him, because they said remember when he touched his head, and he's in there. But he definitely isn't dead.
And now we're going to see, as the movie gets towards the end, we're going to see, again, David, I'll let you speak about how the ending of the movie is a pickup shot, isn't it? It was a reshoot or an additional scene.
Yeah. Well, again, you know, Nicholas Meyer was absolutely adamant. You know, he stood his ground, and he said, "Over my dead body, this is, you know, Spock is dead, and that's how I'm going to keep this movie." And Paramount said, "Okay, but guess what? You know, he doesn't have final cut." So very much mindful of continuing the story. They planted the seed, the space seed, arguably, of, you know, Spock, and seeing that his casket, for better or worse, did not get destroyed, but is part of the planet. And it's really brilliant if you think about how they incorporated the growth elements of Genesis to not only rebirthing Spock, but you know, we don't want to get too much into 3, but you know, they made it an imperfect experiment. And so while that planet is quickly maturing and evolving and destroying itself, Spock's body is quickly getting older to match, you know, an aged Leonard Nimoy, just at the time that they can get off the planet. And it's quite convenient, because we all buy it, because we want more Spock, and we'll take it any way we can get it.
That's right. I mean, just to say, Atma Prime in the Discord has just said something, and what's wonderful is you've just said exactly what happened when they were shooting this movie. She's saying, sorry, forgive me. I love this ending too, because while it's sad, it's also hopeful. When the movie had the original test audiences, it didn't have the scene of the coffin, the torpedo coffin, and the audiences went away crying. They were very sad, but they said that scene gives people hope. And that's why ultimately it was added. And as you said, I believe Nicholas Meyer wasn't happy about it being in there.
And this is the first time we get the space, the final frontier. And you also have the salve at the end that it's vocalized by Leonard Nimoy and not Shatner. So that was sort of also kind of made that sort of eases the pain at the end as well.
Gives you a hint that
kind of lives on in the narrative.
Exactly. Well, thank you, David. That's been absolutely wonderful to just go through the credits now. What a great film. Got everyone just saying thank you for joining us. It's been so much fun.
It's my pleasure.
Again, just wonderful, wonderful movie. It stands the test of time. It maybe is a 39-year-old movie now. It doesn't seem it. It's just great. It holds up. So David, can you, without giving us too much information, tell us any more about In Search of Tomorrow and what you're doing at the moment and where you're going?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very neck deep in Search of Tomorrow. I am actively in the process of scripting segments, movie segments, and scripting chapter segments. Those go to Sam Way, our spectacular editor, who assembles these things, and there's a whole back and forth process we have where I make sure that all the dialogue and conversation works, and once it flows, we start what we call painting it by putting images and clips and the like to flesh it out and make it look something that is coherent and interesting. And it's a very long process, and so we're actively doing that, and I still am getting interviews. I'm lining up a couple more interviews for the end of this month. The last interview I did was probably about a week and a half ago. And there's still more to be done, but I'm actively putting this together and I'm very excited. My biggest challenge is, other than just the volume of work that is required to do this, is going through the volume of content that I've got, because every interview I've done is over an hour, sometimes 2 hours, sometimes even 3 hours, and the conversation has just gone all over the map in the best possible ways, and stories that I've never heard before. That the biggest challenge is how you can fit it all together in a 4.5 hour movie covering an entire decade. And there's just so much to cover. But if anyone has any specific questions, if it's not too specific, I'm happy to answer a couple.
Yeah, ask away. You got David for a few more minutes if you want to ask anything in the chat. I mean, question I've got for you, David, is, and something I've got over a little bit myself now, we're doing some of these watch parties with some of the amazing people we've had join us. Have you ever been starstruck at all by any of these people you've met?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I am starstruck like the next person, but I can divide and compartmentalize. So my starstruckness, is that a word? Begins when I land some talent that I just am in awe of, and they said yes, and I get very excited. But once I'm sitting down with them, I compartmentalize myself as just David Weiner, who needs to get a good interview and an interesting conversation and material that we've never heard before, or new ways to talk about things that we have heard before, to fit the narrative that I'm putting together. And then I shake their hands, we take a picture together sometimes, and then I say, thank you very much. I send a little thank you note. But the moment they walk out the door, that's when I go, I can't believe I just
Exactly.
Exactly.
And I mean,
I'd like to add also, because of COVID, we've done a lot of these as exterior shoots. And at a certain point, the only best controlled environment I could provide was my own backyard. So I had the likes of Walter Koenig coming to the backyard. So I've had Chekov in my backyard. I've had Adrienne Barbeau in my backyard. I've had Sam J. Jones in my backyard. I've had Will Wheaton in my backyard. I've had Alex Winter, Bill and Ted in my backyard, and so on and so forth. And so I have the most celebrity used restroom in the house that anyone here has.
Well, what you need to do is, when it comes time for you to move eventually and put your house on the market, you can put in the description with the realtor that you've had your bathroom used by all these celebrities.
Exactly. And they'll say, what the heck are you talking about?
Exactly. Well, we've got another question here we got a couple of questions. I'm not sure how much you can answer Aaron's question, but I'll certainly ask it. Do you know of any sections in ISOT between the years that you can look forward to, like special effects, comedy, sci-fi, Cold War, etc.? I don't know if you can.
Yeah. The chapters are definitely going to balance. It's going to be a little heavier on filmmaking. So, you know, visual effects, creature effects, that kind of stuff like that. You know, we mentioned matte painting earlier. That's all going to make its way in chapters, because if you think about the films themselves, there's so much to talk about. And, you know, covering Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, you know, in just a couple minutes, you can never do it justice. So the nice element of these chapters in between the movie segments is I get to spend a little more time to focus on some of these other elements that they fit in, and categories that they fit in, or a context that they fit in. So, you know, whether it's talking about the Cold War or talking about effects or anything like that, these are conversations that are had. The question is, where do they fit? You know, do I get to in the context of the movie conversation or the larger chapter conversation? So yet to be seen.
And the very final question we'll give to our friend Sparky John once more, which is, could you speak of any challenging interviews you've had for In Search of Tomorrow?
Challenging interviews. Define challenging. Define challenging.
We'll leave you define challenging, David, for the sake of keeping the peace.
There have been one or two people where the conversation really was, I showed up and they talked, and whatever agenda or questions or path I wanted to take them down, which I normally can control, for lack of a better word, I can guide and navigate and say, this is what we're going to talk about. They kind of said, all right, here's what I want to talk about. And I would ask a question very specifically, and they just say, well, I'd rather talk about this. They wouldn't say it that way, but that was their answer. Okay. But when you have that person who has agreed to be in the room and you're grateful that that's the case, you still get wonderful gold. But sometimes you have to navigate some things that you don't think are going to be relevant to get to the good stuff.
Anyway, David, thank you for joining us. It's been wonderful. What a great film. Really, really. I just love this film. It's been great spending it with another super fan of it.
Yeah, so, thank you. I bow to your like I said, you're above my pay grade with some of this geek elements that I commend you for just your knowledge, and you and Carla, you guys, between the factoids and just keeping things flowing and interesting, and the group that's here to watch, especially the loyal folks who are here week by week, just to make this part of their week and be part of this community. You guys are incredibly important and part of this process. And I'm so glad that you guys do come back to have fun and to hang out with us and with each other. And it's a very special thing that we've got. And, you know, of course, kudos to Robin Block to make it all happen.
Exactly. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to Robin and yourself, David. So what I'm going to say is we will be back next week with our horror community, and we're going to be watching Poltergeist, which I can't wait because that's another great 80s film. And then we will be back in 2 weeks with, of course, Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. Will he return? I suspect he might. But anyway,
well, they're searching for him. Maybe they'll find him, but we'll have to see.
Exactly. Find out in 2 weeks' time. But thank you again for joining us, David. So everyone take care, stay safe, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
And prosper, right?